And you were live.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live on another edition of Hanging with Harley. He is a man that needs no introduction. He is the voice of reason in the chaos. He's the one that paints a very clear geostrategic picture of what is going on globally and helping all of you understand the coming economic shifts that are taking place and what the United States role is and what should be our role in this new global economy. So without further ado, Harley, how are you, sir?
I'm great. I'm back on this side of the Atlantic for a little while and just getting used to the time change.
Yeah, I hear you, man. It's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, I was worried that your flight might have gotten delayed or something because we had storms here. 8,000 flights were canceled.
Well,
It was kind of ridiculous.
The Berlin airports were shut down from Friday to Tuesday with a baggage handler strike. So
Oh,
we
that's
were between the snow and the strikes, and two young kids, yet we made it, and the kids were great. So let
wow.
me start with something that's really significant. In the last 2 days, there has been a complete freakout from the American banker and from the Wall Street Journal over the thing that their fear that won't go away, which is Glass-Steagall.
Right.
And I want to start with this because this is really critical.
Sure.
That people have to understand that the trajectory since last summer, when Paul Manafort, who at the time was the campaign manager for Trump, said that Glass-Steagall will be in the Republican Party platform. It was in the platform. Bernie Sanders had been pushing it on the Democratic side, and Hillary, who had spoken against Glass-Steagall repeatedly during the early part of her campaign, under pressure from Bernie, did lip service for Glass-Steagall, but never intended to go with it. And now Trump has twice, through Sean Spicer, including last Friday, reiterated his support for Glass-Steagall. And so the American banker asked Janet Yellen at her press conference announcing the rate hike, where Janet Yellen was talking through her hat about how great the economy is and why it's now time for a rate hike. But the question from the American banker is, what about all this talk about Glass-Steagall? Actually said, well, there's no need for it. It wouldn't have done anything to stop the situation in 2008.
Oh my
and
God.
Then the Wall Street Journal had another article attacking the moves toward Glass-Steagall. But then Thomas Hoenig, the vice chair of the FDIC, who's in line to be the head of regulation at the Federal Reserve, Hoenig gave an extensive speech in which Glass-Steagall was a major part of what he said. And he said that, look, we haven't solved the problem. The living will provisions of Dodd-Frank have not been met by most of the too big to fail banks. There's no fallback option other than a bailout, and we can't do a bailout again. So he said the solution is Glass-Steagall. So now you have the Trump White House. You have Thomas Hoenig, who used to be the Federal Reserve president of the Kansas Fed, who's been speaking about Glass-Steagall for years. You have 7 Glass-Steagall bills in the Italian parliament. You have an ongoing discussion of Glass-Steagall in the European Union Parliament. And the one thing they keep saying is, well, our Americans tell us that it'll never happen, so Europe won't go for it. And then you ask them, well, who are the Americans who say that? And they say the Federal Reserve. Now, the New York Fed, we've identified the New York Fed, which is the most corrupt gaggle of private bankers in the world.
Yeah, it's a rat's nest.
It's the rat's nest, exactly. It's the New York Fed which keeps putting out the line that Lehman wasn't a commercial bank. It had nothing to do with Glass-Steagall. And this, of course, is the American. Well, the Heritage Foundation puts that story out, the Bankers Association, Jamie Dimon, all these people, as though Lehman existed in a vacuum as a traditional investment bank before the repeal of Glass-Steagall, as if there was not an intermingling of funds between hedge funds, the shadow banking system, investment banks, and underwritten by commercial banks, with a big part of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac thrown in for good measure.
Yeah.
To use an often misused term, it was one big swamp. And all the money was commingled, and there was no regulator at home to do anything about it. So if Glass-Steagall was so insignificant, why would they be so freaked out at its reinstatement? So my first message to the listeners today is, if you have been on the Glass-Steagall bandwagon, gear it up. If you have not been, study it. Go to our website, larouchepac.com. Study the issue of Glass-Steagall and become part of this fight. If you're part of the pro-Trump faction, or the faction that at least looks at Trump as someone who's fighting the deep state, you should be supporting this and pushing the issue with Trump. If you don't like Trump, but you like Bernie, or you just don't like Wall Street, get to work. We have the majority on this issue. And it's a critical issue to save the nation, because if we don't get Glass-Steagall, we will have a blowout. And the blowout will either lead to total chaos, or it will lead to a reaffirmation or a reorganization of the existing elites, who will move to take advantage of blowing everybody else out.
Yeah.
So with Glass-Steagall, we at least have some rules in place that will prevent the financial establishment from controlling the situation.
Absolutely. I mean, it's incredibly vital that Glass-Steagall gets involved. I mean, anybody who says, "Oh, it doesn't do anything," you made the perfect point. If it doesn't do anything, why are they so terrified of it? You know, that is proof in the pudding.
And Marcy Kaptur, who's the sponsor of the Glass-Steagall bill in the House, just sent a message to Trump. Marcy Kaptur is a Democrat from Toledo.
Yeah.
Who's been diligent and persistent and quite persuasive in her support for Glass-Steagall. She sent a note to Trump saying, "We'll work with you to revive the U.S. steel industry." And she said she and a group of Democrats in the Progressive Caucus and the Glass-Steagall wing of the Democratic Party, which now has 38 co-sponsors for her Glass-Steagall bill. And this is a perfect opening for Trump. In fact, the whole discussion came up with Spicer last week at his press briefing, when Gizzy from Newsmax said, "Would you work with Bernie Sanders to push through Glass-Steagall?" And Spicer said, "Well, if he wants to work with us to put some reins on Wall Street and go back toward economic fairness, sure we would." And then Gizzy said, "Well, does that include Glass-Steagall? Does Trump still support Glass-Steagall?" And Sean Spicer said, "Yes." And it was a one-word answer that couldn't be spun by the mainstream media, so they did the next best thing. They just didn't report it. But this has Wall Street's panties in a bunch.
Right.
Terrible tragedy for them if this would come up. They complain all the time about Dodd-Frank, as though they're secretly saying, you know, don't throw me in that briar patch, because they knew they would write the rules. So that's one aspect of the strategic situation. The second leading development is the Chinese government just had their People's Party Congress.
Yeah.
Session. The premier of China came out and said, "We look forward to a great future relationship with the United States and the Trump administration." And he said there have been ongoing discussions. There's a rumor, and it hasn't been fully confirmed yet, but it's a very strong rumor, that President Xi and President Trump will be meeting within a month, which is extremely important. And the potential for a collaboration of the U.S. and China economically also has the Wall Street, London imperial elite in a total turmoil. Now, then you add this desperate CNN Fareed Zakaria attack on Putin.
Oh, God.
Putin is the man in the world. He's a criminal. He's a killer. And the Russians came out with a very simple response. They said, well, as soon as Putin and Trump meet, we'll see some real developments. All this attack is designed to prevent them from meeting.
Correct. Make it so politically toxic that they can never meet. That's what this whole thing is about.
Yeah. And, you know, while all the media focus is on the Russians did it, the Trump is going to send troops into Syria that'll end up fighting with the Russians, and you have all this talk, what they're not reporting is the behind the scenes cooperation and collaboration between the Russian, the US military, the Turkish military. They're not reporting on Putin's maneuvers which include a very interesting talk with Netanyahu last week, where
I
Putin
saw that one.
essentially said, I mean, this was really hilarious. Putin said to him, this is not the Iran of the era of Haman and the Purim story.
Right.
Now, this is an important intervention because, according to Netanyahu, the Iranian mullahs are preparing a nuclear strike on Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem.
Right.
For Putin to basically say, forget it, it's not going to happen, he's also saying to Netanyahu, we give you an assurance that there's not going to be something like that. So let's cut out this crap, this
Exactly.
phony anti-terror war, and let's work together. Now, you have King Salman, or Prince Salman, meeting with Trump. But you also have Merkel coming in tomorrow. And I can tell you from the situation in Germany, Merkel isn't quite sure what the hell to do, what she should say. She wants to establish a personal relationship with Trump, but the German media, which is tied to Wall Street in London, is saying, but she's going to send a message to Trump, don't mess with German exports.
Oh, don't mess with it, because we'll mess with it ourselves. Don't mess with it.
Obama messed with German exports. Obama's the one who pushed through the sanctions that are destroying German medium and small enterprises.
Right.
They've lost 40% of their trade because of the sanctions with Russia and also with China and to some extent Iran. The situation in Germany is dramatically shifting, as I've seen from on the ground. And people who include people in Merkel's party, the Christian Democrats, who are tied to the medium and small enterprises. In Germany, it's called the Mittelstand, or the Wirtschaftsrat, the Economic Council. They've been inviting me to address their conferences. The Reserve Officers Corps had me address their conference in Frankfurt. That's the section of the military that's related to the small and medium enterprises. And they want to know, can we pull off a Trump in Germany? So you have this kind of shift underway. Then you read the New York Times, and it sounds as though any minute now Trump is going to slit his throat and jump off the Trump Tower.
Right. It's incredible to see the propaganda piece that's written against him. But the fact is that they're flailing. What the mainstream media and the establishment is doing right now, Harley, is the equivalent of what I see as a gnat trying to smash its head against a slab of granite.
Well, that's not a bad analogy. The other way to look at it is it's like the captain on the Titanic yelling at the men, don't get off the ship, don't get off the ship. We can get this thing going again.
We can get it going again. Exactly.
And you look at Janet Yellen's comments yesterday. Well, we're starting to get the job picture we want. We've got the inflation picture that we want. We're a strong, robust economy. We're starting to see growth in Europe. I don't know what she's talking about in terms of Europe, and in terms of the United States, she's also just talking through her hat.
Right.
But the reality of the situation is that they are terrified of what would happen if they keep the interest rates at 0% or almost nearly zero. They're terrified that it could lead to a hyperinflation. At the same time, they don't know what will happen when you start raising rates, and the people in the bond markets are worried. The junk bond markets are trembling.
Yep.
And in the meantime, the Chinese and other countries are going about their business building things.
Yeah.
Investing in things. So, you see the effect of a bubble. If you live in a bubble, everything looks okay. Yep. And it's only when the bubble pops that people pop up and say, well, I knew it was a bubble, but I didn't want to say anything.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to say something.
Good.
No, that's all I got to say. Somebody's got to say, this is a bubble. It's not going to last. If you have your money in pension funds and you think you're doing well because the market's going up, did you forget what happened in 2008 where about 40% of the equity in pension funds was knocked out? Did you forget what happened to all those people whose net wealth was tied up in their homes and their home values dropped by 25 to 50%? 6 million families lost homes. Have people forgotten that already?
Exactly. And we've never really recovered from that. What we have been going, what's been happening is they've just been running a phony baloney phantom economy, and then they have the phantom bubble effect, the phantom wealth effect, and they're saying, "Oh, look, everything's recovered," and all that QE has done is it's done nothing more than create more capital destruction. It's distorted markets the world over, and these guys they're again, it's like what you said with the Titanic. They just want to, oh, come on board, everything's fine. We're going to get this thing, we're going to get the ship corrected, and everything will be okay.
Yeah, we already hit
Ridiculous.
the iceberg, and now the iceberg's moving away, so we're not so worried. But the other thing about this, which really is, I think, the most important thing, is that when a bubble economy and a consumer economy go hand in hand with globalization, free trade, deregulation, and speculation. And this has been the greatest transfer of wealth in world history to the smallest group of people in world history. And the destruction of the middle class in the United States is far advanced right now. The old working class or blue collar section of the population have been destroyed. And this includes African Americans and Hispanics. And for every single person who's benefited from an initial public offering venture capital operation, there are 99 that failed and lost everything. And so while you read about Snapchat, you don't read about the 99 others where people had some vague idea, they had some vague promises, they put everything into it, and they ended up with nothing.
Right.
So this idea, one of these things that nets 2, 3, 4, 5, $20 billion distorts, as you say, the view of markets. But what isn't clear to most people is why a consumer economy can't work. And it's because you're not producing wealth with a consumer economy. It was one time described to me by an Israeli economist as everybody selling the same glass of orange juice to everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually someone drinks it and it's gone. And all the wealth from the sale of each glass of orange juice is lost.
Right.
Now, you have a situation where we're not producing new wealth. We're not producing jobs that put people to work, that give them a paycheck, that allow them to actually consume larger items. The fact that people run up credit cards now on groceries or on visits to the doctor or dental visits, that's not a healthy economy. And the effects of this are seen in terms of the exports, in terms of the physical capital expenditures. In Europe, just as an example, the head of the European Central Bank, Draghi, promised that the money that was going to be created through the central bank buying bonds would go into the real economy. And so they've pumped 1.2 trillion so far from quantitative easing and negative interest rates into the so-called European economy. Out of that 1.2 trillion, about 160 billion has gone into some kind of economic enterprise. They're not specific on it. The rest of it has gone to the banks, and 50% of it has gone to the British banks, even after Brexit. So there's a game going on, and it's called produce liquidity to bail out banks. And that's why Glass-Steagall is a critical issue.
Absolutely correct, man. It's very, very critical. And it has to stop. The casino economy that we have going on, the casino gulag that is Wall Street, it has to come to an end. Harold, let me ask you this. We just had the recent elections in Holland. What's the pulse over there right now? I mean, I'm sensing perhaps voter fraud in the same vein as what occurred in Austria. But what say you?
Well, I think the problem is that people like Wilders and like the Austrian candidate, what was his name, Hofer, I think, that they don't really have solutions other than playing on the polarization around religious and racial issues and immigration issues. And this is what we see in Germany. The Alternative for Deutschland, as they moved more and more away from an economic policy of going out of the euro because of the need to invest in the real economy, and instead just making it about immigration, they started dropping in popularity.
Right.
That's because there's no appetite in Europe for race war and religious war.
Right.
And some of the right-wing parties aren't offering more than that. Now, Le Pen is a little different because she's quite clever on the Russia question, the need to break the sanctions, and also the need to go back to the franc. And that as an industrial, a Gaullist, you might say, industrialization policy, an economic nationalism, as opposed to just some form of coded ethnic purity.
Right.
And some of the people who vote for these parties are doing it for the reasons that they don't like the EU, for the right reasons. But the message is not clear enough. And what I've been saying in my the meetings I've addressed, are you worried about the immigration issue? Let's stop the damn wars in the Middle East and North Africa. Let's stop regime. Let's finish off NATO and the Obama doctrine and go toward a Russian, US, Japanese economic investment plan, which as part of it is going to be to clean up the terror networks, which are funded by the Saudis through their networks in the British Empire and the Obama administration. If you break the war policy, you're going to be able to deal effectively with terrorism, which means deal with the immigration policy. Yeah. Then what does Europe have to look forward to? Well, working with China to rebuild North Africa, to rebuild the Middle East, to go into the parts of the rest of Africa where they're just starting to build high-speed rail lines. They're going to have more miles of high-speed rail in the southern Africa than in all of Europe in 5 years because of the Chinese and the Japanese. Wow. And if the South Koreans can clean up their act, South Korea will be a part of it.
Right.
And what Trump is looking at, the emergence of a Eurasian perspective, which is what Lyndon LaRouche and Helga Zepp-LaRouche have been talking about for some time. I believe you went to one of the presentations Helga gave in New York City, right, where we're having conference after conference, where we're bringing in people from African governments, some from European governments, from the Chinese government, to talk about these kinds of programs. It's the classic case of we're throwing the life preserver out there and giving people a chance to climb onto the rescue mission. So that's where the future lies. And the problem is that Wilders in the Netherlands allowed himself to be somewhat marginalized around the refugee issue. And then, of course, there was the whole way the Turkish Erdogan issue was carried out, and the government there acted to look as though they're being tough against the Islamic world. It's a fraud. It's very much like the argument in the United States that Trump is a racist.
Yeah.
What's the point of the argument? To create racial polarization.
Right.
If someone's serious about doing something about black unemployment and the loss of income in the African American community, you'd say they should work with Trump on Glass-Steagall, on ending these free trade agreements and rebuilding the industrial economy. And that's the policy of Trump. Right. So why push this racial polarization? Well, that's what George Soros and others are doing. By the way, Senator Mike Lee of Utah and 6 other Republican senators are finally moving aggressively to look at Soros and what Soros is funding. They're still focused primarily on Bulgaria, Macedonia, Albania, when they should be focused on how Soros and Obama are trying to pull off a color revolution coup in the United States.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that the fact that this shows that we're making headway on Glass-Steagall, on going after Soros, on what's the real nature of the Ukrainian so-called revolution, which was a coup pulled off by neocons and neo-fascists.
Right.
And the final point, V, that I think really has to be emphasized is you have to make the connection between these strategic developments, both either the war-type developments, regime change, and so on, or the alternative coming from Russia, China, the win-win proposals, the connection between the war and the financial crisis. Too many people separate those things completely, and as a result, they can't really explain what's happened in the world since the end of World War II. But I think I think at LaRouche PAC, that's one of the things that we've made a real emphasis, that Lyndon LaRouche, as someone who came out of World War II and developed a perspective of the real power of American economic nationalism and what that represents historically, globally, and into the future. That's the pathway toward peace and progress in the world.
Absolutely. Very well said. Harley, how can people follow you? How can they contact you? You at your contact, your email, or your social media if you have one.
Yeah, the LaRouchePAC.com is the best place to go to get information. And again, people can sign up there for a daily briefing lead. You go to LaRouchePAC.com, and I think it's under the action button. We'll send you the daily briefing lead that we put out for our own organization and for our paid subscribers. You don't get the whole briefing, but you get the briefing lead for free. People who want to be in touch with me, and I'm getting some communication from your listeners, and I'm very happy about it. They can write to me directly at harleysch@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Harley Schlanger, thank you so much again for joining us for another edition of Hanging with Harley. Folks, again, subscribe, hit the bell icon, so this way you will be notified that the next time Harley's on, so you could tune in and you could listen. Please share this podcast with your friends, your neighbors. It's important that we raise awareness of what's going on globally and the situations and challenges that we're facing today. Thank you all for listening, and we'll be back again next week on another Hanging with Harley. Have a great day. Take it away, CJ.